Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of my new podcast, which I hopefully will be interviewing lots of different interesting women. I'm calling it Wild Woman. It's a topic I'm very passionate about, really understanding and learning from women who have really come in touch with their instinctive, their true nature, their authentic selves. And I really want to share and listen and learn from women and what they have been through, their challenges, how they've overcome them and continue to overcome them, and go on to live very authentic, passionate lives, very unique lives. I think that's what we're all here to do, is to be our very unique selves and express ourselves. And that's how we benefit humanity, So on that note, I'm delighted to introduce my first guest. I'm really, really grateful and just so inspired by this woman, Rebekkah Woolfson. I'm going to just give her a little introduction, and then we're going to get going and hear about her story and her lessons and her wisdom to share. So Rebekkah, firstly, to tell you, is she's a certified life and executive coach, and she's based in Dublin. She's over 20 years social work experience, and she's worked with children and adults and groups, and she continues to do that on mental health and well-being. And she is also qualified in many different energy medicine modalities, everything from EFT, which I'm sure we'll hear about, therapeutic mindfulness, Reiki. So she's really got a big bag of tricks there to help anyone. It's just magic. I think that's the future, how we bring together our very unique experiences into our way of being in the world and helping and supporting others. Just to share how I met Rebekkah, I met her back on the 16th of March, just the day before St. Patrick's Day in Dublin. A very synchronistic meeting, I have to say, in the Royal Marine Hotel in Dunleary. We were both at an event or a talk by a lovely lady from America, Laurie Ladd, on the whole subject of sort of well-being and how we're evolving and growing and all of that. And we met. I think Rebekkah, she'll tell you herself, wasn't intending to be there. And at the end of the night, standing at the bar, we met. We just happened to be, just got chatting, and I just felt beautiful energy of her, wonderful connection. And I was delighted then she asked me to be interviewed on her past podcast. So today I want to take the opportunity to interview Rebekkah as a real wild woman. I'm reading that book, Women Who Run with the Wolves. That's the background to this podcast. So and she typifies it to me, someone who's really in touch with their true, authentic, instinctive, intuitive, wild, true nature. And I think that's what we're here to do. So welcome, Rebekkah, after that long introduction, and thank you so much for being here.
Oh, Celine, thank you so much. I'm welling up already before we begin with such a beautiful, generous introduction. And you never know if somebody truly sees you as a wild woman. I only said it to my husband this morning. I said, I'm being interviewed on a wonderful new podcast. And I told him the name, and he started laughing, and he was like, oh yeah, that sums you up all right. There you go. You never know how people perceive you, but so delighted to be here, Celine. I really am, and thank you for the opportunity.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome. And yeah, let's get started. So, and give you the opportunity just to tell us a little bit about your own backstory, your history, and what has brought you to now doing the work you're doing, and maybe just to share some of the events, maybe challenges that you would have faced in your life that you feel were really, I suppose, pivotal in getting you to where you are now in your life.
Thanks, Celine. Yeah, so I mean, gosh, I'm in my 40s now, so I'm technically middle-aged, and I'm so lucky, haven't I, to have made it to this stage. And I suppose I grew up in Dublin. My mum and dad, I had an interesting upbringing. I suppose we were a liberal Jewish family in Catholic Ireland at the time. So to grow up kind of late 70s, early 80s, being different or feeling different, being in a minority, a very small minority, which it still is, particularly in Ireland. So I did grow up with that sense of feeling different, and was schooled then in the UK for a year, and I remember moving with this Irish accent to this Jewish school in Manchester, and it was the time of, sadly, all the, all the troubles and the IRA bombings. And so there was a good bit of discrimination. I'd faced a good bit of discrimination here in Ireland growing up for being different, if you like, as it was seen at the time. There wasn't a great diversity in Ireland back then. And then I went to this school and I was seen as a threat with this Irish accent. So I just remember by the time I was 10, so the first 10 years, and my beautiful son is 10 now, and I just felt like I didn't really belong anywhere, if that makes sense. I didn't fit in. I didn't seem to meet the criteria. I didn't really know what the criteria was. No one really gave me the memo, but it was something like that I just needed to be like everybody else. And inside, I felt very different, and I connected. So never mind on the outside, I was quite a dark looking child. I would have been like, my pigment definitely changes as you get older, but I probably looked Spanish, or could have even looked Middle Eastern. I was really dark. So even though I was not a black child, if you like, or a child from a different ethnicity, but there is Latvian blood. So my grandparents on my dad's side had been refugees. So they fled the pogroms in the late 1800s. So I come from really interesting family history, actually on both sides. But so my dear mum, she's in spirit now, but she converted to Judaism to marry my dad in 1967. You can only imagine, like, so she had some, as I used to slag her, I was like, I can't believe you'd do that for a bloke, mum. She actually found her own spiritual sort of sense of belonging within an organized religion, if you like. So good for her. It was meaningful for her. I could see that throughout her life. And so a big rich history. And then came back from the UK, didn't want to leave. Things didn't work out in my dad's business, so he brought us back, and I had to start all over again. I remember going back into school and having to learn Irish, and now I slag and I say, well, I think the English just emptied my brain. They just got it and went, get rid of all that Irish. I've got fabulous English friends and I love them dearly. But I mean, in those days, like, obviously I went to an English school. I wasn't going to be learning Irish. And then I came back and it was like, I forgot everything. It was so bizarre. It was really strange.
What age were you? Sorry,
I
Rebecca.
came back about 11. So it was only a year, and it was just unbelievable. Like, I don't know, I always remember that being quite profound. And then I started to make, we moved, into a new area where to live, and that was pretty amazing. I started to make new friends, which was really positive. I missed the friends I'd made in England, but obviously how will I put it? So the first 10 years, there was a lot of turbulence and there was a lot of difficulties, and a lot of change then. But by 10, it was like a new era, a new energy came, and I wasn't as hung up, maybe because I'd spent the year with all these Jewish people. I was just, eventually they accepted that I was Irish, if that makes sense. And I just kind of rocked in and got on with it. That life then, even though it was difficult to leave and start again, I started to become slowly a bit more maybe confident or accepting of myself. And then, by the time I went to secondary school, I made amazing friends. I had a really positive experience. All that stuff around racism. Yes, there was one or two episodes, but nothing compared to some of my formative years, which I didn't really speak about for many years because it was quite severe, right? There was physical attacks. It wasn't just name calling. It was harsh. Nowadays, you'd have more Garda involvement, and all that. But it gave me such an understanding, and nothing is ever wasted, Celine, as you know. I believe all these things were sent to prepare us, because I then decided, I wanted to always help people in some way. I didn't know necessarily what that looked like, but for a career, I wanted to help people. And I eventually worked in intercountry adoption for many years. Amazing. One of the most privileged social work roles I've ever done. It was really beautiful work. And I remember my superiors and mentors, preparing me to train groups and things. And they'd say, your story has prepared you. You'll understand, you'll identify with the children who feel different maybe, or how it is to be sort of this intercultural piece. And it gave me such appreciation. Of course, not the same, but some little element I could really relate to and bring all that in and hopefully share it for the greater good, for the families that were building their families at the time and for the children. So I kind of look and think everything has, wasn't wasted. Does that make sense? Every experience I've had,
Absolutely.
it's
Yeah.
never wasted.
Yeah. Yeah. Even though it might feel different, I think at the time, isn't it? Because just what you described there sounds horrific as a child, what you went through. And yet to say at the age of 11 or 12 that you sort of rocked then into secondary school, even at that young age, that you were able to sort of, that resilience, you were able to sort of bounce back. And did you know at that stage, when you say you knew you always wanted to help people, did you feel it even? You wouldn't have felt it at that age, no,
No, well, I was
necessarily.
I was so blessed that I had this mum who really had a big heart, and I always say she had a heart of gold. And from a young age, I suppose some of the traditional of teachings of liberal Judaism is a thing called tzedakah, where we do kindnesses, like daily
Mm,
kindnesses for others. It's kind of the tenets of probably most major religions, or
mm,
imagine in
mm,
different belief systems. But certainly by 3, we were going into nursing homes. You'd be sitting with the elders. You'd be told they're like your family, and that, so if they had no family, I would sit with the elders, and like at first, at such a young age, I would be scared. I remember that. But then I would start to get to know them. We'd go in a couple of times a week and we'd do some voluntary work. We'd be sitting with them. It was so gorgeous. And then some of my relatives would have gone into, it was a particular Jewish home for older persons, some of the rallies would have gone in. But I saw everyone as my relative. I eventually, by the time I was 7 or 8, I just saw them all as family, and the comings and goings, and obviously saying goodbye to people too. So that was beautiful. I feel she really role modeled that and did a lot of that kind of voluntary piece. And then
mm,
I knew I was different from the point of view I was an empath, as we call an empath now. I just thought I was a strange child. But I felt the pain that people were going through. So if there was, a difficult emotion or a row had happened in, before, like I would just be very off balance then. I didn't have any tools, obviously, as a young child to regulate myself or understand what was happening to me. But essentially, I mean, quite young, I would have been tuning into spirit, and I would have seen little orbs and little angels, and they became my friends. And I probably was just seen as an oddity, I imagine, looking back. But now, what's great, I love about it now, is all the kids, it's like people are much more open, and there's more tools, and you can talk about these things. Where by age 9, I was reading heavy, big volumes about astrology. Now,
were
obviously,
you?
I
Wow.
was, now, whatever I could get my hands on, I'd be reading, and but eventually, then I suppose the things that I would feel and sense and see, I was quite scared of it. There was nothing too foreboding, thankfully. I felt it was very light filled. But every now and again, I'd pick up an energy, maybe it was a spirit or whatever, and I would be looking over my shoulder. I spent a lot of my youth, right up into teenage years, quite fearful of that. I
Okay.
always felt like there was somebody, somebody
Yeah.
either trying to connect with me, and you'd be sort of like pushing it away because not wanting to acknowledge
Mm.
there was that level of connection with spirit world.
And did you have anyone in, like, say, like you talked about your mother, and that's fabulous, and the influence, and just shows the influence and the importance of people, whether it's directly within family or others around us, that can really support us in sort of becoming more of ourselves in life. That we're not afraid. But was there anyone there to sort of, or your mother to say that you could talk to about this, what you were experiencing or feeling or seeing, or did you keep it to yourself?
Oh no, I kept, I mean,
Sure. Yeah.
I kept the racism experience to myself. So that
Yes.
was interesting. I kept that to myself for a long time until it spilt out more publicly, and my mum had to get involved. But the reason I kept that to myself is, I suppose, it didn't feel safe. My parents were going through difficulties. They'd marital disharmony, so things were tough at home, and I never felt I could burden somebody with that. So I kept everything inside. Then when it
Mm.
came to the spiritual side, I absolutely had no one to talk to. However, I must have opened up to my aunt, who's, I mean, sadly, most of my family have passed on both sides of the tree. But my auntie Bernie was my mum's sister, and she lived in London, and she read my tea leaves by the time I was probably 7 years of age. Totally forbidden. I mean, you're not meant to do that for children, as you know. But she would be like, come on, and she would do it. And I was thinking, I'm like her. And then we'd go over to London for weddings or different things, and I'd always pick up something in her house. And she actually was a member of like a spiritual church. You know,
Mhm. Okay.
herself, her partner at the time. So I used to be running up and down the stair, like getting out of the room where I'd be picking up, do you know what I mean? But
Yes.
I'd often say to her, there's something, and she'd sort of laugh and dismiss it. So I could talk a little bit to her, but essentially, absolutely not. I would say I was in the spiritual closet up until probably like early 20s. Like I
Okay.
hid any gifts that I had, like I hid my own gifts.
Hmm.
I kind of tried to push it away and just got on with obviously doing what my family of origin wanted, the organized religion piece. And I made my bat mitzvah, and that was, it was great, all
Wow.
those milestones. And then I went into what they call sort of Jewish exodus. I sort of left for many, many years until I was ready to start a family. And I kind of, now my partner is not Jewish, but very,
Hmm.
very supportive. And we'd have the conversations then, did we want to look at passing on such a rich heritage and
Yeah.
all the struggles that maybe our ancestors had gone through? I felt there was some like moral obligation there to not turn my back on it, if that makes sense.
Yes,
So I'd been in
absolutely.
my, when I call it the Jewish exodus, for 10 years, getting on with my own spirituality, because I believe
Hmm.
you don't need a religion or a particular set of ideas to be spiritual. It could be, as I say to people, whatever makes the trees grow. If it's
Yes,
goodness of
exactly.
humanity, it's the goodness of humanity. It's whether we all, it's respecting belief systems. My wish for the world would be that eventually it will be unified, and that
Hmm.
it will come under the one, but that doesn't take away from individual expressions of belief or faith. I
Yes.
think it's great to
Yeah.
have diversity and learn from each other, but overall, that maybe one day there'll be an overarching kind of
Yeah.
unified way of connecting with source, or whatever people want to call it.
Yeah, that does feel very much what's even with the Catholic Church in Ireland and the experience I would have had, it's nearly that you have to go through that, and there's so much that was gained maybe from that, the values around that you said that are really common, I think, to most religions, if you look at the good side of them, and then often we have to go away and form our own relationship and maybe go into exodus like you did and go reject it all so that
Yes.
we can go and back and find our own unique relationship with whatever makes the trees grow, as you say, because for everybody, that to me, I don't mind what words people use, whether it's God, nature, universe, it's whatever keeps your heart beating, isn't it? And
Yes.
your hair growing and your nails growing, exactly as you said. And
You-
so so it sounds like my God, you've had, even up into the age that you've described there, quite a lot of challenge, even right up from a very young age right through to your teens.
yeah.
What, in terms of then what has led you, I suppose, into the path of the work that you can do? I
Yeah,
can absolutely see how you do work with young people. Can you just tell a little bit to the audience just what led you into
absolutely.
all of the various things that you're doing now?
So, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, Celine, so my parents had quite a difficult marriage, very turbulent. There was a lot, that I would say there was deep love, but also, went into disdain at times, and so they weren't happy together, and there was always that threat of, if you like, that the family would split apart, and it did, but for good reason, and it was the best thing for both of them. And
Mm.
best thing, actually. My sibling is older, so she'd already kind of moved on and flown the nest, if you like. But certainly by the time, I'm thinking by 14, 15, by 15, that was it, that their marriage had ended. And so for me, it was very turbulent. We were out of home. It was, there was possibility of court. It was really challenging. And my dear mum at the time was really browbeaten to try and save her home. She had me, a minor, there was a lot. She'd been orphaned at 10 months old. She'd lost her parents. Her beautiful granny and then uncle reared her. She'd, three other siblings, but she'd come from hardship. She'd come
Mm.
from hardship, and she really wanted this relationship to work. And her family meant everything, but it just wasn't working. And in fact, it was toxic. So the best thing, when I look back, that was probably the pivotal moment for me. It was a very stressful moment. I was the first year to do our junior cert. Thank God for good friends who are still my great friends today, Celine. The great group of girls who were kind of like the family I choose for myself, and they supported me. So I had families to visit, to go to, where there was a lot more stability than what I had in my family.
Mm.
I really believe that's what young people need. They talk about in research, My World survey, there's a new updated one out for young people, and they say one good adult is so important. And I would say I had several. I had my uncle on my dad's side. I had my auntie Bella, who, again, they're all in spirit, I've no doubt, listening to this now. And thank God I had them. I'm so lucky because I valued what I had, and I had my
Mm.
cousins. And so even though things were difficult and it was a lot of turbulence around 1992 in particular, when that settled and we got back home eventually, um, and my life, I was starting to date boys and all that kind of stuff. And, so I was leading a kind of normal life, but had a lot of heaviness around my family issues, if you like. I
Mm.
would say at that point, I was stepping into my own. I mean, certainly reports from school, well, they were probably quite mixed. I'd say I came across as a very strong feminist. I was probably very angry with men because, my role model as a father, and I mean this with the greatest respect to my dear dad in spirit, he certainly wasn't an evolved man, and he had his own pain and his own trauma coming from refugee parents, and there was a lot that
Mm.
probably went on in his background that might be unknown. So therefore, I was an angry young woman, and I put that anger towards great passion. So I did things
Mm.
like fight for the first rugby team for women to be accepted, even though I only played for
Wow.
6 weeks and wasn't very good. And it started to show that I was deeply into human rights and social justice. And then it was sort of inevitable that I'd want to do something in the caring profession. And I think deep down what drove me, Celine, is that I was very wounded. I had this wounded inner child. I went through a lot, and for sure, I felt like no child should suffer. And even
Mm.
though what I had gone through was much more psychological abuse, it was difficult, and it
Mm.
was a lonely childhood, even with
Mm.
good support around me. And so I wanted to look into how I could particularly help children and families, and I did. So I left, I did social care for a couple of years, and then I knew that I would do my degree. So I left. I didn't want to wait. I think I had to work for a year to get into Trinity. And I said, no, I'll go straight. And I went back to Manchester and connected
Wow.
with my childhood friend who I'd made when I was there. My aunt was living there at the time. And I went to the University of Salford, and I continued my studies to get my qualification. It wasn't easy. I had to work 3 jobs. I didn't grow up where I was
God.
just handed a pile of money. And I suppose what is interesting, I look back now, is I was really creative. I had this
Mm.
creative spirit inside me, and I wanted to be an actress actually originally.
I could see that.
Yeah, I wanted to be an actress. I wanted to be a thespian.
Fantastic.
I wanted to be a
Yeah.
thespian. I was like, none of that TV. I want to be like on stage. I wanted to be in the Abbey, and they all, all this. I really loved all that world, and so I sort of let go of my dream at the time. I knew that I could entertain people or I could help them, but which would put food on the table? Probably helping them. So I made a sensible decision. I've no regrets. I often think, maybe my ego wouldn't have been able to stand rejection in the world of entertainment. There would be a lot of that
Mm.
waiting around
Mm.
roles, and, like having to probably have several jobs until you get hired. So I always think, look, there's no mistakes. So you're in the right place at the right time. And as one lady told me, she came into it in her 30s, and she used to say, "It's never too late. It's never too late." And
Exactly.
I'd say, well, I don't know. Well, maybe not, but certainly, I then shut down my creativity, I would say, and devoted
Mm.
my life to my profession and to helping people. And in many ways, I wouldn't advise anyone to do that. I think that caused a lot of problems within my energy field. Blockages,
Mm.
particularly around the sacral chakra, around
Yes.
creativity,
Yes.
and struggling then with my own vices, my own addictive personality, my own issues, because in
Mm.
many ways I kept pushing down my essential nature, which was very
Mm.
creative. And
Yes.
so everything I'd approach, so I'm not like an artist per se, but I know that I have this creative flow in me, and it has to come out.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
it
I love that. Yeah, I
yeah.
love that,
And I
Rebecca, because
wouldn't let
yeah,
it. I wouldn't let it come
yeah,
out. It was like
yeah.
I was very split, I suppose. I just shut that part off and was like, I need to just work. I was in the masculine. I need to just work. I need to just provide. I need to just help. And so even though there was great joy along that journey, I would say I made it quite difficult for myself as well, because
Mm,
what's the word? I deprived myself.
yeah. And do you think that's so, just so much in what you're saying, it's just where I go with the next question, but I'm just really, and it resonates so much with me, because I think you truly are in what I call the wild woman nature. And what I think a lot of that is, I just like to talk a little bit about the role of trauma, but when you talk about creativity, I think they're so interconnected, because it's been my own experience. I think when we stuff down a lot of what you said, which is the human instinct to survive. And when we're young, we don't, as you said, often don't have the tools, we don't know any better. I think that can block, because that creative flow, to me, it's in all of us, it's our life force. It's exactly what you described, what makes the trees grow. And that, when it's sort of, to me, it's like the other side of trauma, our creativity can come out. But if we've suppressed a lot, and I think just listening to you, and just from as long as I know you, I think that creative spirit is present in just who you are. So whether the stage, all the world's a stage, isn't it? So just your interaction every day with people in the work you do is bringing that. I can feel it. I can sense it off you. That beautiful, creative, fun-loving, just artistic. So it comes out in so many ways. It can't be contained, I think, when we come out the other side of our traumas. And I just maybe want to talk to you a little bit about that, because you've obviously, just for the listeners as well, you've experienced so much, you've come through so much, you've overcome so much. Can you talk a little bit about how you see trauma? One of the things I've often found personally, and I've heard people say, is that, oh, well, I haven't been through anything horrendous like someone else. So we start to compare ourselves, unlike maybe sometimes we can experience lots of little traumas where we're ignored, or our creativity, like you said, is maybe someone says something to us. So just how would you, for anyone listening, because I think it's such an important aspect of our lives, for us to come into that wildish, creative, true nature and authenticity, is to understand what trauma is, and maybe how we can navigate it.
Yeah.
I think would be really helpful.
Great question. Massive question, Celine.
I know,
I do
we're
my
all
best.
still
I do my
lifelong.
So I would see, like, in terms of trauma and then the role that trauma plays in our life, as to be human can be quite a traumatic experience. I would say every day being human, there's little mini traumas that happen to us, right? And whether it's, you're stuck in traffic and there's somebody having a road rage episode because maybe their trauma with a capital T, or even their little traumas have built up and it's spilling all over the road. So it can be, either the trauma with the capital T, which I believe is more, some of it can come from childhood, of course, like ACEs, like, adverse childhood events. There's, the heavy hitters, which will be like separation, death, grief, loss, abuse. These things are, the more adverse side of it. And as you mentioned, we can often suppress a lot of those things in our childhood to survive and to get on with it. And often then when we're in a stable relationship, I always say to people, particularly couples, and it's like, oh, everything was fine, then all of a sudden one partner falls apart, but maybe it's because now they've the opportunity, they feel safe, they feel held. It can be a compliment. It might not feel like that when you're on the receiving end of it, but often
Lovely.
until we feel sort of safe to be able to allow this to come up in us for healing. And I always believe, things come up at the right time, even though it might be the most inconvenient, but it comes at the right time on our soul's journey. When it comes to, as I said, the little T's, to be human can be very traumatic, but it can be amazing as well. I think if people can find the language, and often people struggle with the language, but if they can find a way to express what's going on, having done women's circles for now over 3 years, I would say that everybody needs a circle and everybody needs a tribe that they feel safe. And if we have that as a container, as a space that is safe, where we can be our true authentic selves, where we can be unmasked and just drop all these personas in the moment to speak of our big traumas with a capital T and our little ones, I do believe the world will heal bit by bit by bit. So I haven't gone through some big T's and some little ones. I found so many amazing tools that help, and I would urge anyone who's listening going through something really big, a big life event where it's been deeply wounding, or even all those little T's that build up in the human experience, to seek professional support. Do not be afraid.
Mm.
I've gone through tranches of psychotherapy over the years, 3 years, 4 years. I've had some amazing therapists who've had my back. And in many ways, because I'm so interested in the mind, body, and spirit, and I work in the mental health space, I would say it's born out of that personal experience. And in the spiritual world, we call it the dark night of the soul. And as you know, Celine, it's not often once, it can be many times in a year, never mind a lifetime.
Get
As
lots
we
of
say,
practice.
absolutely lots of practice. I mean, as I always say, the universe is always listening. And I wrote
Mm.
on my, like a magnet or whatever, a blackboard magnet. I was like, I learn through love. I learn through flow. I don't need to be hammered now all the time.
Mm.
But we often, I think we go through these experiences to prepare us. And because I've got deeper into the spiritual work over the years, and I've had a wonderful teacher and learned how to open the Akashic records, my own and others, and read, looking at people's soul journey and do a consultation with them on that and look at the guidance, often tapping into maybe some past life experiences, but
Mm.
also future lives. So what I find is that often it's our karma. We're coming up against these things because we have karma to clear or karma to balance. And it's not always to punish us, but it is to teach us. And I do see that our current life right now, is about school. This is school. I see it as
Mm.
school. And it's like sometimes the more we get hammered by these dark nights of the soul, you could say that we've signed up for this soul growth, this experience. Now, I
Yeah.
often joke with lots of friends and clients. I say I must have been on crazy drugs when I signed my one, because I'm quite happy go back and have a few easier experiences. But then would it make me who I am? Do you know, maybe I would have been overly materialistic, or I might not be the
Mm.
person you'd want to be friends with. I don't know. I could
Yeah.
have, you know what I mean? So I often say, well, thankfully, I've had things that have had to take me to my knees over and over again, to be humbled and to realize, like, we're not here for long. We're here for a short time. It doesn't all
Yeah.
have to be about suffering. Of course, I believe it is about living our best life and bringing in the joy and the beauty and all that. But certainly, if there's big T's or little T's that are bothering people, to reach out for support. There's creative therapies, there's energy
Mm.
medicine, there's amazing healers in the
Mm.
country. And for those who are listening abroad, there's so many different supports. And hopefully now the pandemic and all the difficulties
Mm.
on the global stage has brought some good things out of that difficult couple of years, which might be that we're able to talk a bit more openly about our mental health in particular. Where before,
Yeah.
Selena,
Yeah.
shut down, or people, there was a lot of stigma, there still is,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
less. I'm hoping that over time, that at least
Mm.
that might be one good thing that came out of it,
Yeah. Yeah.
if
That's
that makes sense.
just fantastic. It's just wonderful to hear you speak. And you have so much to offer just for anyone listening. I mean, that is such a powerful message to reach out, and there is so much support. I mean, I think, like what you said, we hear the word trauma so much, and in a sense, and I think we've been conditioned often in the past to sort of get on with it. I hear that a lot from people, get on with it. And that actually, I feel, and I think from what you're saying, only keeps us stuck. And yes, life, it's school and there's growth. I think it's about expansion. And the more we sort of come through each trauma, find more tools, and see that we can heal and sort of expand from it, we're better able. It's like peeling the onion, isn't it? We keep going. There's greater joy that comes, I have found, with, and yeah, sometimes you're being rocked all over the place, but it does build a very strong, don't you? You build a very strong core, or and yet, there's lots of different things that can happen. But what I'd love as well, you just to talk about is, so the benefits of, really, because often sometimes I've heard people say, like, and I felt it myself, no, I can't do it, I can't go there, I don't want to face that pain, I know there's still something there, it's just too much. And I've found when I've done the work, often it's the thoughts of it, but it can be released quite quickly with the right support and with the right help. It's not, you don't get lost. That's what to me was this miracle. I said, why didn't anyone ever tell me this? It's the thought of it that keeps you in that suffering for much longer. So can you just talk a little bit when you work with people and the benefits that you see? Because, you know, this,
Yeah.
otherwise it can just hold you back in life. You're like,
Yeah.
what's the other side of all of this when you do this
Yeah,
work?
yeah. I love what you said. What you
Yeah.
said,
Mm.
Celine. It's so relevant, and you know, I've done loads of different modalities, but
Mm.
essentially they all boil down to one thing, I feel, which is supporting people on their journey to transformation. So sometimes, you know, people want an outside, like as in, you know, for sure I do. I might be going to 5D at times in my spiritual work, but you know, we live this 3D life as well in our human form, and it can be really challenging at times. But I often say to people, like, you know, I was working at the weekend doing some Reiki and then some life coaching, and you know, beautiful clients I work with, and I often say, particularly for people new to something like energy medicine, I say, look, try not to put it out in your mind that it's that you won't have a spontaneous healing. Like, you might, if you've got a particular physical problem. Yes, it's complementary to maybe checking in with your healthcare professional or your doctor or whatever, but do not put it into your mind. Your subconscious mind is always listening. 90% of our behaviors are controlled by our subconscious mind. So if we put that belief in there, you know, oh, I cannot have spontaneous healing, and it's going to take 6 sessions, it's going to take 6 months, 6 years. I think you're right. Things, when you're ready, because you're co-creating all of the time, when you're ready for that change, or ready to release, or ready to drop whatever it is that has been holding you back, then miracles can come in instantly. I've seen it. They come
Mm.
into a space like, it's unbelievable. There was a beautiful lady I worked with, and I attuned her to level 1 Reiki and level 2. And she was really suffering with an autoimmune condition, had a lot of physical pain in her body, and spoke openly about it. And when we checked back in the group, like 21 days later, you know, after the cleanse, she was like, I haven't had a pain in my body in these 21 days. And when we checked in again, she sort of went into remission for 3 or 4 months, which was completely,
Wow.
absolutely nothing to
Yeah.
do with me. I mean, I was really clear on that. I was like, listen, this is nothing to do with me. I just did a little key there, but you know, because
Mm.
it's obviously, it's whatever you believe, the divine, you know, it's flowing through, you're channeling it through. But at the end of the day, she was ready for that. To me, that was a
Mm.
miracle. Like, and there
Yeah.
was no expectation, you know what I mean? I didn't
Mm.
go in having that expectation. I don't think she did. But yet it was so beautiful to witness. And, you know, by the grace of God and all the rest, how grateful to have that, you know, to be able to reduce your pain meds or whatever, to live
Incredible.
incredible, like
Yeah.
incredible.
Incredible.
So,
Yeah.
I know, because obviously as much as I do this work, I obviously go to my own, you know, I have an amazing acupuncturist, you know, I'll go for different things when I need it to keep myself as clear a channel as I can be while I'm
Yeah.
working on my own stuff. I often say to people, particularly when I start off as a life coach, I'm like, don't think my life is perfect. It's far from that. It's a daily work in progress to be able
Mm.
to just, you know, keep
Yeah.
going and
Yeah.
growing and all the rest. So I do feel that, you know, we tell ourselves stories, and the narrative is really, really key. We're coming into a space, I feel, things more, you know, in on an intuitive level than necessarily having read millions of books on it, although I am a real avid reader as well. Of a whole library
Mm.
here beside me on
Mhm.
spiritual texts. But what I would say is that we are manifesting much quicker than we ever did, and that's the energy of the planet upgrading and changing. So therefore, you know, anything's up for grabs, you know,
Mm.
all types of
Mm.
healing, mind, body, spirit. So
Yeah.
when I meet with clients, people come to me, you know, I mainly see women, but I do work with some men. Um, Literally, I will see people going through massive changes in their life. They might be coming because they are navigating a particular hard transition. It
Yeah.
might be they're miserable in their career, you know, they really feel there's a lot more inside them, but they can't quite unlock it. Or it could be somebody navigating a separation or divorce, and they need
Mm.
to get themselves mentally and emotionally, spiritually prepared for that journey, because that's you know, it's a massive road, and
Yeah.
people support on those massive big transitions. Do you know?
mm,
Or
mm,
it could be a lot working with women who might have caring responsibilities, because I know what that was like. I still have a child, but my dear mum
mm.
was, in long-term care for a whole decade.
Yeah.
So I know how hard it to try and find a bit of me, what they call the me time, or a bit of time to focus on your own goals or your own journey, your own healing, when you're being pulled everywhere. So I can work
Mm,
with in particular who might be overburdened by their caring responsibilities, and they've lost their identity, and they don't
yeah.
even know who they are anymore, because they're somebody's mother, somebody's
Yes.
possibly wife, daughter, all the different roles and personas we play. So I
Mm.
often think, who do I work with? I suppose I work with so many different people, and also, like young people, children and young people as well.
Yeah, that's just magic, Rebecca, to listen to you. I mean, it just seems as well to me that when you talked about as well the planet now and how everything is sort of shifting very quickly, I think now everybody obviously maybe experiences very differently, but I would feel the same. I think no one could argue that we're not going through a lot of change on the planet, however you see that playing out. But and what you talked about, the narrative as well, I think in that's another aspect of coming through our traumas, the stories we tell ourselves. I lived in a sort of very victim sort of mode, I think, for years without even realizing it, because I believed what a lot of, let's say, what society and the what people like to call the matrix, or whatever you want to call it, the outer world often is telling us. And that it's so important, like I said, to come back into that authentic, and you've been through so you're much yourself. It's just, as you said, nobody has it perfectly, but you have that lived experience, so you can really relate and resonate with what people are going through, and helping them find, as you said, that authentic, that you can be lost in being a carer, being this, being that. And isn't that the key to me, coming back to sort of the topic as well of this podcast, this wildish, I say wildish woman, it's relevant obviously to men, but being a woman, I suppose I can relate more. And to you, when you meet someone who's in that, that is the journey, isn't it? I get the sense that that's what you're about, is in all of the various aspects of work that you pull on, really helping people come back into that authentic expression of who they are. And it is so unique. This is what really I just feel is so important, because we're often conditioned to fit in, and it's not. We're here to stand out, in my view. And can you talk a little bit about, you know, and I just touch on the word success, it's often a word we use, but just how you would see that in terms of like someone coming to you and saying, okay, yeah, a successful life, let's say, how would you describe that?
Successful life. Wow, it's
Mm,
again a brilliant
mm,
question, Celine. I think success is is often defined by society, by conditioning, by social norms, and particularly gender stereotyping. That I suppose, as a coach in particular, the first thing I ask people is like, what's your own personal version of success? And I often
mm.
laugh and say, well, I'm not a performance coach. You'd be glad to know I'm not a performance coach. But of course, a performance coach has their place of course, particularly in the sporting world and all of that. But what I would say is that people have to define what it means to them. For me personally, you know, that my family is healthy, that my child is as happy and as balanced and growing, learning the skills of this age now that he is, to be hopefully a fully fledged independent adult that can contribute to society. That to me as a parent would be amazing success, right? Um,
Mm,
but to be successful is for me personally, is to live a life of balance, and that you can actually, we all might have day jobs and different things. We got to pay the bills, the daily grind, but that you can find a way to get your true soul's essence to express in this lifetime. That for me is
brilliant,
success. It's my own personal,
brilliant.
not to die with our music inside us. My mum was my greatest role model. She was my greatest teacher. She'd acquired brain injury through trauma, and she led such a difficult path, and I supported her on that journey. I was one of the key players, and she taught me everything I I know to this day, because she struggled with loads of aspects you can imagine. And
Mm,
she sadly, to a degree, did die with her music inside her. And she showed me, and I often think, was that part of, maybe that was part of the soul's journey. Clearly it was. It was unfortunate circumstances. It was a terrible tragedy at the time, one of the toughest things I've ever witnessed. But I look back now, and she's gone, it'll be 4 years in September, her anniversary. I talk to her every day. I miss her every day. I love her so much. But I say, Mom, you taught me everything I needed to know, because that is not happening to me. So she is my biggest driver. And by God, I don't know what music I'm creating, but I hope it's of use, And so that's, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not that some, I don't know, people have all kinds of amazing gifts inside them. Do you know what I mean? But what I mean by that is, like, I felt like she had so much more.
Mm.
She was struggling even before that. She was just surviving.
Yeah.
And she did a really brilliant freaking job. She was an amazing, strong warrior goddess, okay? She had so many gifts inside her, but she didn't get to breathe them out. She didn't get to expand them. She didn't get to live them because of conditioning, because of, men at
Yeah.
the time, and all of those things that come, and the difficulties that she went through. So I'm so grateful to her, because I say, thank you, Mom. It's not happening on my watch.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, even if it
Yeah.
fails, I got to give it a little go, because that's so important. So that's my version of success. And I think people
Fantastic.
need
Yeah.
to define
Yeah.
what it means to them. Seligman, this great psychologist, he would talk about, what does it mean to be happy, and, the different tenets of happiness. And he has this wonderful model called PERMA that I'm sure you know about, Celine. And it's all about having those things in balance, whether it be the relationships that fill us up, that they're good enough relationships, that they're healthy relationships, that we find something that we can be in our flow state, whether it's a hobby, whether it's when you go sea swimming, or whatever the thing is, playing music, it could be journaling, it could be anything at all, but that you lose a sense of time, that you're in
Yes.
that, and it's just a beautiful feeling. But also that you have that greater sense of meaning in life, that, so to give, he would also believe that to give, when we give, we do charitable works or help and be of service, we gain so much in that, because of the sense of connection. We're not isolated anymore. And, so all of these things, to have all these things as best we can in modern life, it's tough, isn't it? But to have kind of a flow as much as we can in balance in these different segments of our life, and to also feel good about our achievements, whatever they are, whether it's a little small thing, really big thing, it doesn't really matter. It's to celebrate that and not to compare. So I call, the comparison, I call it death by comparison. When we get into, when we get into a comparative mindset, we really are hiding to nothing. And actually, I think we cause psychological harm to ourselves. Sometimes natural that we may compare. I always say to my clients and friends, if it comes up, and remind myself, if jealousy is showing up in your world, what's that about? So somebody's driving the latest car, or they're living in the house that you want, or they've got a holiday home, or they're going on that world tour that you always said you'd go on, or whatever it is in the relationship that you dream of. It doesn't really matter what it is. But if jealousy is coming up, one of the core kind of human emotions, then just take stock and thank it and say, okay, jealousy, you're trying to teach me, you're trying to show me. So what is it that's missing in my life? And what can I do to bring in and manifest with action the things that I want, the qualities that I want within or in the external material world? So rather than cursing the thing, as best we can, and not be afraid of it, and not judge ourselves, because we're human at the end of the day. We will have these core emotions, and that's okay. Once we don't live in them, once we don't live in the anger forever, once we don't live in the sadness forever, once we don't live in that green-eyed monster forever, don't let it consume, because our emotions are like waves, they don't actually last that long. I used to believe, because of my particularly childhood lived experience, I used to believe that emotions would kill us. I used to think, if I let the emotion rise up, it is going to destroy me. It will take me over, it will engulf me, and it will drag me under the sea, and I will never come back from that. I absolutely had that as a core belief. And then I trained as a dialectical behavioral therapist in mindfulness based psychotherapy about 10 years ago through my work in social work. And I had to sit with all these things and learn so much about emotions. It was fascinating. It was, I
Wow.
often say, you know, as much as I was trying to implement it in my day job and help my clients, I learned so much about myself. I was like, okay, today we're going to experience this and we're going to sit with it and see, will it combust me or will I survive? And you know what? I'm still here.
Oh my God, Rebecca. Well, that I think there's so much you said in this podcast that is just phenomenal for anyone for listening. And for me, I'm learning so much. But that, I think that is just magic. And I think what you say there about the idea, I've lived with that. I still can. And I think that's, I'm sure in your experience working with clients, is what holds so many of us back, is that if I go into whatever this emotion is, I'm going to die and I will never get past it. But it's often the story, isn't it, that we tell ourselves about this is what prolongs it, as opposed to being able to move. It's a wave, isn't it? It's a wave that moves through us. And I think just what is on the other side of this is just, isn't it? It's everything. It's our power, it's our freedom, it's our creativity, it's our joy. This is the other side of letting this move through us. And like, just one thing to say to you there as well about when you talked about your mother, I have to say, when you say she died with her music, I know that song, that book, isn't it? Don't Die With Your Music Still in You. I don't think she did, because look at how, you know, who you are and what you were doing and how you credit your mother. Maybe that was a big part of her music, was to help you find your music. So often I just, listening to you going, she didn't die with her music. I absolutely not. She sounds like a wonderful mother and still with you. But look at all you're doing, and you couldn't. I'm saying you couldn't be that, but it's just very obvious to me. My God, she'd a very important, lived a very important and valuable life. So we'll just honor her, an amazing woman. I can see that in you being such an amazing woman, and what you're going on to help people with. It's just phenomenal. It's phenomenal. I can just feel nearly her energy coming through as we're talking. And just another point I just wanted to pick up, just because we're sort of coming towards the end, and there's just a couple of more things I want to ask you. But what I really found, which has been something that's been probably in my life and maybe played out in other people's lives, this idea that you cannot maybe follow that authentic, that your passion, who you are, because of all this daily grind. And we sort of can go, oh no, that's for someone else, I can't do it, there's too much stress. And I think that's a beautiful way to describe, I know success is down to each of us, but having that combination of, there is a way. And obviously you're working with people and they're seeing this, that you can combine. And I found that there is a way, when we get to the other side of our traumas and we do this work, to combine and to manage or balance, let's say, isn't it, our passions, as well as keeping a roof over our heads.
Yes.
Isn't it,
Well, goodness, I mean, this is
yeah.
absolutely like, so to kind of fast forward, I decided through my own journey, and we'd gone through some particular heavy losses over the years. I talk about it quite a bit in one of my own episodes on Shatterproof, my podcast. And I kind of was, whatever, I can't even remember what miscarriage number I'd had at that point when I had my second child. And I was like, enough. And I was working, heavy end of social work, in middle management. I just stopped for a moment and I said, you've got to do something or you'll die. It sounds so extreme, but deep down I felt like my soul was dying, is basically what I'm talking about. So my soul was dying. It wasn't that I wasn't certainly helping people. I would often attribute the work I do to Archangel Michael holding me up to do it. I say, well, it might be me, but really I've got a team of people around me, or a team of invisible helpers. But there was more, and I knew there was more. And watching my mum get iller in the nursing home and different, and I just said, you know what? Just stop and make a change. Make a freaking change. So I did. I went back and I said, right, I'll go back and do the professional life and executive coaching, and just try to combine all the different qualifications and, to work with people in a different way. I've no regrets. But in that, I'm a part-time business. I describe I'm a soul entrepreneur, because I really want to work on that deeper soul level with people. But I still have to put bread on the table. And so often, Celine, of course, there's weeks that go by and it can be really tough. It's so much easier if you're just full-time in the business or full-time, sometimes when you're trying to do too much, you can be frazzled. So I'm aware, I think that's part of my journey, is learning self-care still, and saying, okay, this month you're going to do this, and this, and you're going to be able to impact, hopefully positively, people's lives. And what are you going to do for yourself? So all the time while we work in our businesses, we've got to work on ourselves. And I didn't, that's intimately something I've learned the last couple of years. We think we're working on this entity that is a business, but actually we are, particularly if it's just a one-man band, one-woman show, whatever you want to call it, we have to work on ourselves, and we've got to fill up our own cup, and it's all of that to be able to support people in the work that we do, which is, it can be emotionally labor intensive, as amazing as it is.
Yeah.
But I would encourage anyone who's listening to this, if you have an idea, if you have a little spark, you have that niggle, it's going around and around your head, everything that you want is on the other side of fear. I had this meme on my desk in work at the time, going back, 4 years ago now, and I had everything you want is on the other side of fear. And I had it, and every day I looked at it and I'm like, okay, no, I'm not ready. Now I'm not ready. But the universe rushes in. There's a very famous quote by Goethe about commitment. It's a beautiful quote. And I remember at the time I was, okay, go for it, right. And I remember visiting, my son was on a play date, and as I was leaving the family's house, thanking them, I noticed the famous quote by Goethe, and I read it, and I said, thank you, universe, that's my sign. It's like, just go for it. And after reading that, that's exactly, I lived the quote. So then doors started opening, and I'd meet people, and it would happen. And paralysis by analysis, I thought about it too much, but then I said, just go for it, just do it. And sure, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but at least I'll have tried. And so I would say, for anyone listening, even just starting small, starting to live your true soul's essence, expressing your soul's journey in whatever way. It can be a hobby, but if you have gifts that you want to turn into something like an enterprise, go for it. But just start somewhere, take action. You don't have to, hand your notice in and get your P45. That would be foolish. I mean, I love the book, what's her name? She's amazing. Elizabeth Gilbert, The Big Magic. I always recommend that book.
I have it there. Yeah.
Yeah, particularly to creative people.
Revisit.
And she'd say, she'd say that, like, you've got to keep going with your creativity. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to pay your entire mortgage straight away. So, it's being mindful of that. Sometimes I think we have this either or, and we're not able, or we're very black and white thinking. I would say that we're living in an era that hopefully is much more a creative way of making money, earning money, sharing our gifts. It's not as 9 to 5 driven anymore. And the young people who are coming behind us, amazing young people, they're learning that too, because everything's changing. How we live our lives, essentially. Who would have thought we'd be talking like this?
I know. And and even the last few years are, I think that's taught a lot of people, hasn't it? Since the pandemic and everything, just that, a lot of people don't, as you said, don't want to go back to the 9 to 5 but I love that advice. Oh my God, I'm gonna take that advice. Everything you want is on the other side of fear, isn't it? Because fear is it's held me back so much as well in my life. And I love that idea. I found that as well after cancer. Even just take one step. I always say that, just take one step and you will be shown the next. So like you've said there, you don't have to, nobody's saying give up your job tomorrow. I mean, if you can, fine, but nobody's saying that. Do one thing differently, isn't it? Just anything. If, whatever that creative urge or whatever the urge is, just do take the first step, and I find that you're guided or pushed depending on, there's a timing, isn't there, in all our lives. We need to be ready. There was a lot of things I wasn't ready for, probably still amn't, but and isn't that I think a big part of what I sense as well, the value of working with someone and like you, and someone who can reflect back. When you get in touch with that sort of true essence of yourself, you start to see that you start to trust that sort of guidance. Because if you're in fear and in sort of listening to the external world, you can get a little bit disconnected, isn't it, from yourself. And
100%.
you can't hear what the next step is, because
No.
the outer world is so loud, or the fear is so loud. I just think that's such super advice on so many levels, Rebekkah, about, just how we deal with our trauma and how we sort of move forward, the benefits of it, how we get in touch with that wildish nature. So I do want to finish on asking you about, because I really believe you typify, there's a couple of lines in the book about women who run with the wolves, about the sort of the wild nature of what it means. And I just want to read that, because I think you are this, and maybe you can just leave the audience with some final words about what just sharing a little bit maybe more about yourself and how people can get in touch with you. But this, I feel, sums you up. When women reassert their relationship with their wildish nature, they are gifted with a permanent and internal watcher, a knower, a visionary, an oracle, an inspiratrice, an intuitive, a maker, a creator, an inventor, and a listener who guide, suggest, and urge vibrant life in the inner and outer worlds. And I really think that is you.
I've chilled now.
I've chose to reading it because I think it is just what we all have available to us, and I think you just offer that on. And I think this is the time for us to sort of, this is how powerful we are. And I just want to say thank you. I mean, you really, for me, it's been such a gift to have met you, and it sort of urged me on to do this, because when you're meeting women all the time, particularly who inspire you, go, this needs to be shared. And so thank you. I'll leave the final words to you,
Oh,
and
that was
how,
just
and
amazing.
how people can get in touch with you.
Yeah. Oh, you're just a natural. I just we just click straight away, and I feel very blessed. I feel very blessed to know you.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so I mean, really, women, and I know there will be men tuning in too, and men are freaking amazing too. But what I would say, why I love working with women in particular, is that women, we are naturally creative. Whether you give birth or you don't give birth, it doesn't matter. We are naturally creative beings, and we create all types of amazing things in the world. And so as women, it is our time. The divine feminine is rising. She was suppressed for so long, particularly on the island of Ireland. I mean, we don't need to go into the history, but Manana Heron and her babies were, badly treated, and the amount of institutionalization. And anyone listening to this affected, please seek the support that you need and deserve. But we've all felt the pain, particularly on this land, and it is time for women to gather. It is time to come back to listening to the different generations that are going to, the crone and all of that, to hold the different hands of our grandmothers and our great grandmothers. And they don't have to be blood related. That's what's amazing. And that we come together and support each other. And in that, we then are able, I believe, in time, it's already happening, to sit with our brothers in arms, to sit with the divine masculine, and for those energies to merge and come together. We will be much more within our sovereign selves then, much more balanced. So anyone going through anything at the minute, I would say, please reach out. That if you're pushing those big traumas or the little ones that keep building up, you're pushing them down, that it will get louder and louder. And it's not to scare people, but that's my lived experience. I shove it down. I shoved it down with all types of substances and all types of behaviors. But essentially, it was always going to rear its ugly head. But it's not as scary. Sometimes the first step is the hard one, picking up the phone, but then it can move so fast. So just reach out for that kind of support, and don't be alone, because we're all connected at the end of the day.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That is just a magical way to finish. And I'm so grateful for you. I'm just so grateful to have met you, to being your first guest on my podcast
Honored.
and connecting. And I know it's only the beginning. I'm sure we'll be doing more. There's so much more. I just sort of feel there's so much more I could talk to you about today, and particularly young people as well. We might do another episode on that because it's a passion of mine to support young people, always, just as from my own life experience as well. And how can people, just so before we finish, how's best, I will add the links below, but how best for people to make contact with you? Because I'm sure there'll be plenty of people who want to after listening to you.
You're very kind, Celine. So yeah, I have a website, wolfcoachingacademy.ie. I'm on Instagram on Wolf Coaching Academy and also on Facebook. So they can get in touch there. My email address is wolfcoachingacademy@gmail.com. So, to feel free to reach out, and just to reassure people, like, I work in a very person-centered way. I don't really have a cookie cutters approach to coaching. I blend things to meet where the person's at, and we come up and we tailor a plan that works for them. So, it is, whether it's me or somebody else, do reach out. And the best gift you can give yourself is a really good therapist or a really good coach, and to always have a few healers in your back pocket. So
I love that.
thank you so much, Celine, for having me. I've loved
Thank you
it.
so
You're
much.
amazing.
Enjoyed it so much. Thanks a million.